Hi. Hey. That's not creepy. So I'm Annie Stickney. I run the digital marketing analytics for JPMorgan Chase. I've been there for about 5 years now. So my focus is on search, organic and paid, and content marketing. And I am your Debbie Downer for the conference. Hey. Want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Everhart. I'm the Senior Manager of Commerce Marketing at the Home Depot. I've been with the Home Depot for coming on 6 years, variety of roles, search, organic, paid, traditional, digital media, channel strategy planning. Really focus a lot on co-op marketing, so how we market on partnership with our many suppliers, what we do from an attribution standpoint, and really how can we leverage and enhance our first-party data to make the best consumer experience possible.
Hey, I'm Jim Grates. I lead digital media for Hilton. Been there a little over a year. It was a year in August, so maybe a year and a half at this point. I feel like probably most of us in this audience are third-party addicts, and we might possibly be in the first stage here, which is denial.
Yeah, first step is admitting it.
This has been an interesting topic for us. It ranges everywhere from denial to confusion to fear, but I think that's a healthy thing to be in, because this could be, it runs the gamut from being an existential threat for us to maybe not as bad as we think, but definitely something we're all going to be talking about as regulation ramps up in the U.S.
Hi, I'm Amanda Martin. I head up enterprise partnerships for Goodway Group. We're an independent programmatic search and social agency. And I oversee all platform, supply, data partnerships holistically at the corporate level. And so basically, my role is to help the company navigate these changes and then how it impacts how we work with our partners, what we can do and what we can't do. And it's been a busy year.
Good times, good times. So a little bit about ITP. What is it? ITP is Apple WebKit's version of cookie blocking. It stands for Intelligent Tracking Prevention. Mozilla's version is ETP, totally different. It's called Enhanced Tracking Protection, so it's the same. And then Chrome they have actually deployed their own version, but as opt-in, it's not by default. Come Q1, it's going to be a little bit more widespread. They're probably going to have one of those splash when you log into your Gmail, like, hey, do you respect your privacy? And then they're going to have an opt-in button for people like my mother who have no idea what's going on, but she's probably going to say, yes, I want my privacy there. So it's going to be a little bit of a bigger thing in January. So what is it? It is all third-party cookies are no longer allowed to be set at all. So you have no third-party tracking. So that's a good time. We'll let that sink in. Existing cookies are about 30 days if it's first party. Client-side cookies are only allowed to stay for 7 days. This is really only going to be affecting click-through attribution. View-through attribution is pretty much screwed at this point. So I like to really get to the chase. So this is actually a direct quote from the Apple WebKit, like introduction, what is ITP and what is it going to do? Unintended impact of ITP. There are practices on the web that we do not intend to disrupt, but which may inadvertently be affected because they rely on techniques that can also be used for tracking. We consider this to be unintended impact. These practices include measuring the effectiveness of advertising, logins using a third-party login provider, single sign-on to multiple websites controlled by the same organization, embedded media that uses the user's identity to respect their preferences, the like buttons, federated comments, or other social widgets, fraud protection, bot protection, improving the security of client authentication, analytics in the scope of a single website, and audience measurement. And then they end that bullet point list with, when faced with a trade-off, we typically prioritize user benefits over preserving the current website practices. We believe that it is the role of a web browser, also known as a user agent. So we'll let that sink in. Good times, good times. What are your guys' thoughts? What do you think is happening? What are your thoughts on ITP?
Well, I'll kick it off. I think the reality is ITP isn't a deadline that's coming. It's already here. And the cookies have been limited throughout 2019, if not before that, on Apple. And then Mozilla has followed suit. And then Google, we kind of all held our breath when they had their summit, and we were all waiting to find out if they were going to kill the cookie. And I think what happened is that they didn't kill it quickly, and so everyone just went, oh, we're good.
Yeah.
We're good. We're fine. And so I think what we have is we have large blind spots in the consumer journey, and some brands are either avoiding those blind spots or they are unsure how to navigate those blind spots now that it's different. And so what we're seeing with our clients is really a widespread kind of difference between everyone's approach. There's no one concrete approach to it, but I think the one that we're seeing the most, which is the scariest, is the like head in the sand. I don't think it's going to be that bad. And I just think that if we're using the analytics and the attribution in the way we always have, we're now misleading our spending and our buying power. So I want to see the industry take it more seriously in the sense of solution-oriented and not how to work around it.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're there yet because it didn't get totally swept out from underneath us. And so we have some cookies, and so we're kind of continuing on as we think we should.
Yeah. And that kind of, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, and I think you mentioned the point that you said so much well is blind spot, right? And the way that I look at it is this is regulation that needs to happen, right? We've been in this digital advertising industry for a long, long time, and it's been a little bit of the wild, wild west, right? With everyone doing a little bit differently things, and there's been any sort of regulation of how we are going to either protect the consumer's privacy data, give them the consent to have that protection, and so I look at this as there's always been a blind spot in the customer journey, right? I think, and I hope everybody in this room knows not to blindly trust third-party platform ROAS numbers, right? I mean, does everyone know not to just blindly trust those? They're inflated. And I think we all know that by now, and now that this is just going to be a little bit more face first for it, right? They've always been able to capture the overall sale. And for us specifically, that's great that you can say, hey, yeah, Facebook, you drove a sale on HomeDepot.com, but I always have to go deeper into that attribution to say, okay, well, was the product advertised ultimately the product purchased? And if I rely only on third-party cookies to tell me that, like, they can't do that for me. So there's always been that kind of blind spot, and there's always been that type of understanding that we're not going to have the full customer journey. And now with this, there's just such more reliance on the first-party data that you have in your systems to help you complete that whole customer cycle.
I would add, at status quo at this moment, we're probably okay. Chrome, we can do a lot with, right? Apple, for some reason, has taken on the role of a regulator, which I think is very interesting. So I don't believe that Chrome will follow suit voluntarily. But now with CCPA and Apple being in California, could be a chance that they influence CCPA.
Peer pressure.
And push, well, just not even peer pressure, just force the regulation on it. Chrome.
I actually disagree. I don't think that Google isn't going to follow suit. I just think they're going to do it in a different manner than Apple is, because I just look at what are the motivations of those companies for what they're doing. Apple is playing regulator, and I don't think it's all necessarily a bad thing, because if not, then we're going to have a very few number of companies that can control basically how our whole industry works. I don't know that they're doing it in a completely unself-serving manner at this point. But I do think that Google is taking steps to follow suit, because if not, they're going to have to break up.
Yeah.
And so they have a self-serving reason to at least appear to be moving in that direction. And I think, like right now, everyone's cookie strategies are not okay as they stand today, because your cookies are going to have to be reset. They're going to have to be using secure same site, which isn't new, but it is different. And so right now, like, our trafficking teams are working closely with our clients to ensure that we're racing towards that February 20th deadline, when some of your third-party cookies and first-party cookies, they're set and they're okay, but they're not set correctly anymore.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of internal work.
Yeah.
I think we're ignoring the work we need to do to continue with what we can do today, so you can exist in Chrome and do what you're doing.
Because it's been so slow, so they're like, oh, okay, like, we've got time. You don't really have that much time.
Yeah, and it's internal education, which has been a theme today. I mean, everyone in this room is probably familiar with it, but when all of a sudden you're going to start seeing so many more unique visits to your site because you're not having that 30-day cookie anymore, and your leadership's going to be like, wow, we are crushing it today, right? It's up to us to go back and say, hey, this is actually what's happening within the industry. You're not going to be able to make these big business decisions that's totally blinded. We have to make sure that all of this is happening outside of just these closed four walls.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of goes into one of the questions I wanted to ask you about with Google and being very self-serving. Right now, what they're doing in the UI is they're serving scaled conversions, which isn't actual conversions. It's what the conversions are with like an added little boost based on what they think you should have gotten from Safari and ITP. So one of the ways that I really discovered this was a year and a half ago, and I was trying to compare the API conversion numbers to the UI, and they were never matching up. And then Google was like, oh, by the way, it's this. We're not putting that scale conversion on the API. And I'm like, well, that's special. Like, what do you think about that? Like, because I think they're probably going to stop using scaled conversions. Is that going to make people freak out? What do you think about the scaled conversion?
Well, I think to Erin's point, like, you have to take platform data that you get, it's directional, it's not black and white. And then I also think that the scaling conversion isn't a bad concept, but it should be done in-house with your data and not externally with someone else's data. So I think the concept of scaling out what you can see in, say, Chrome, and what you are seeing in Facebook, in their walled garden, and what you can see elsewhere, can inform, based on historic evidence, what you can correlate to what you can see. I just don't think you should be turning to a third party to do that for you.
Yeah.
I think you should be working with your partners, with your in-house metrics.
I think that's also why like not many people know about it right now, because they haven't seen it in the UI. Like the numbers look the same.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
true. And the fact that a lot of people just take it as fact.
Yeah. They're like, oh, this is 100% what happened. You're like, is it?
Directional at
Yeah.
best, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as long as your internal metrics are moving in the same direction as what your platforms are saying and what these third parties are saying, those are the things that you look at. I mean, if they're starting to see some very large variance between, I mean, that's when you need to dig a little bit deeper.
I see this as a huge opportunity, though, for brands and for CMOs to get closer to the actual business metrics and the actual business decisions, as opposed to managing media budgets and kind of working within their silo. So I think all of this, although a headache, is moving us in a direction where we're a more business-oriented industry.
Yeah. So a lot has been talked about all these new strategies like DDA and auto bidding. A lot of that relies on touch points that have happened prior to the actual click-through conversion. Do you think right now, like what, if the cookies are being deleted and that, like DDA can't see that, is it by default swaying towards Mozilla and Chrome? Like, do you think that those strategies are inherently flawed because of this? Crickets.
Potentially. We're moving more and more towards probabilistic data, which is opaque, right? So, and I think the promise of digital for years was giving us more deterministic data to make decisions on. So we're using model data to produce a model to get a modeled output.
Yeah.
So it just gets more and more complex. But as digital marketers, we find ways around it, and we work with what we can.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also that gut check, to your point, Erin, of like, what are you assuming? And then are your assumptions aligning with the metrics you do have? So I don't know that it's flawed. I just think it's based on the data it has. Mm-hmm. And obviously, hopefully we'll have more technology advancements that will help us kind of like bridge that gap. And I think maybe we need to get in more conversations with Apple, quite frankly, about how to understand their browsing consumers, since they're putting the consumer first and not any of their interests. You know, we can work with them to protect their consumer and work better in their browsing space, as opposed to it continuing to be a blind spot, because they don't want the result, even though it's what's going to happen, to be a bad user experience, which is how we got to the place where consumers are pushing for regulation.
Yeah.
It's partially our fault because we provided a really crappy experience and want them to just consistently take it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we have the opportunity, you know, to grow and change. I also think that within your own model, what you have control over about where you are spending should help inform your bidding strategy, and maybe you can't go on autopilot as easily as you used to be able to in a lot of these platforms.
Mm-hmm. Good times, good times. Okay, so let's go into, what do you think the eventual, like, what do you think about like the fix that's been in place right now? So Google, what they are pitching and what they have provided, and Facebook and Twitter and all the other brands have done the exact same thing. Their fix for this is, instead of dropping that cookie on a doubleclick.net URL, they're dropping it as your first-party URL. So it looks like it's first-party, and it continues to persist. With all the updates from ITP, the last one was 2 days ago, do you see that being a fix that's going to be around for a while, or are they going to get smart about it? Like, how are we going to react, and how do we keep our jobs?
I'm curious to know what you guys think. I can't imagine that's going to be a long-term fix.
Yeah.
Ad tech is only going to get smarter. It's only going to get more sophisticated, and they will continually find ways to block these Band-Aids that Google and Facebook are putting on to mask their third-party cookies as first-party cookies. I don't know what the long-term fix looks like, right? I really can't foresee out in 5 years, but I have to believe that the way that technology is advancing as fast as it is, there will be some sort of middle ground that allows the privacy protection from a consumer intent while still allowing us advertisers the ability to do our jobs. I
think in a way it might be good. We have a cat and mouse game with regulation now. This happens in other markets, and typically constraints actually drive innovation. So now we've got the best developers in the world at the largest platforms. They'll be motivated to try and find new solutions for this. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is what got us into this situation is sort of the creepiness factor, right? So the more desperate you get, the more possible it is kind of make decisions trying to get ahead of regulation that might be seen as more creepy by consumers.
Stalker vibes. Yeah.
Well, and that's just so funny because we have, on one hand, consumers are saying they want the control of their own data. I say this as well, too, right? I don't want anyone to have access to my data of what I do. That should belong to me. And then on the other hand, they're saying, well, I need the most personalized internet experience all across the web on every viewing browser I look at. And like, girl, you can't have both. Yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting that if it really goes in the worst case scenario and we lose all access to it, and then consumers start to feel the pain of what bad advertising looks like, right, before these great personalization practices came in place, like, will there be a trade-off? And they say, actually, I'm okay if you give me a little bit more of my data because I get a better thing in return. And that's really, I'm totally going on a tangent now. It's really on
you do you.
Us as marketers and advertisers to provide that value to the consumer of why they need to give consent to use their data in the first place, right? And I think like Chick-fil-A and Starbucks are two companies that I think do it really, really well because the value prop of them logging in and using their data is significant for the consumer because they get loyalty rewards and they get customized menus and customized offers and mobile ordering and their coffee is waiting for them literally right then, right? As a consumer, I'm like, I'll give you my data for free coffee. Heck yeah, right? I mean.
Yeah, I think on both points, I think that we need to stop, as an industry, we need to stop looking for a fix. The cookie was never intended to be the foundation of identity in this industry. Maybe we got lazy, maybe we just moved so fast that it didn't catch up. I think it needs to be a completely new technology that potentially doesn't exist or is like in the ground stages right now. I think the key thing is that as advertisers, we need to come to the realization that consumers are going to content. They're not going for the ads. The ads are there, but they're going to that website for the content that website produces. So I think the consent of the consumer is going to be driven by that value prop. Erin, to your point, I think brands can achieve that with the right efforts. And not all brands have equal ability to do that because not every brand can give free coffee to users to get
One
them
day.
to track everywhere.
We're never going to do that.
Yeah,
Probably not us either.
there are a lot of banks giving away free coffee.
Yeah, my
So-
thoughts are on my face.
Yeah, I think, but what I think is that we need to see where the value prop the consumer truly has with the independent internet, and it's the value prop that they have with Facebook. It's the value prop that they have with Instagram. I log in, I give you my information, and I get the connection or the context to people's lives, or I get to follow celebrities, or whatever or they get their
It's
news.
the curated life.
So scary.
Yeah.
But that's the transaction that we probably need to re-identify as our identity base. And so I think the consent platform that regulation is bringing around will tie into that next solution. And I think it pushes a lot of power to the publishers that they haven't had historically, that we as the buy side or as advertisers need to kind of get behind and support with them. Because if you really look at where you're advertising, no one is truly, with all the things that are happening, advertising long tail on the internet anymore. We are advertising in incredibly small niche places that are brand safe, that are good brands, that are good publishers. And so that's the drawback, is that we are not, giving revenue to the internet as a whole out of protective advertiser needs. But that means that there's a smaller group of people that could solve that problem. And I think there'll be a bunch of new tech. I think there are things that are coming out now. There's Brightpool that comes out with, that has a theory on how to do consumer consent. LiveRamp has ATS, which is a totally different graphing model that they believe can work in Safari. So there's a lot of beginning stage opportunities. There's no solution right now.
Yeah, because it's a moving target as well. It's
But if
hard
we
to have a
s-
solution for
yeah.
a moving target.
But if we stop trying to stop Band-Aiding it, just put some people in some garages and get some new technology, and I think we might have a new foundation in the future.
Their mother is proud. So any thoughts, musings, as we wrap this up, and then I'm sure there's probably going to be questions? Final thoughts?
I just think that it's doom and gloom because it's a headache and it's a lot of work, but I think there's long-term opportunity, and I think it's the sign of a maturing industry when we are no longer looking for wins that are 2 to 3 months out, but we're looking for 5 to 10 year wins.
Yeah.
And so I think we're growing up.
And I would also just level set that if you're using third-party cookies for retargeting, which is a really, really common practice, it's still not perfect. I mean, how many people have bought a product and you're continually retargeted with that same product?
The question was asked today with
Yeah,
purple.
it happens a lot, right? And then when you factor in the in-store purchase piece, like when you have a brick and mortar store, that makes it even more complicated if you're solely relying on third-party cookies for your retargeting. So it puts where I think is a greater emphasis on your first-party data, a greater need to own that retargeting decisioning in-house versus relying externally for that. And we are certainly lucky that we have the resources, the scale, that treasure trove of first-party data to be able to do that. And if you're not looking at that or seeing how I should handle the retargeting yourself, I mean, that's something that you should start doing now while we're still in this kind of weird gray transition zone.
I think what good is coming out of this is that, internally, it's forcing us to have discussions around our own policies. We're a very conservative organization in terms of sharing data outside of our own walls. And as a marketer, I want all the options available to me, so we're more conservative. So, but in this new world, we have to be very realistic about what those actual constraints are going to be to performance, and what tactics we have available to us. So it's kind of good now to have this, because we know the future is uncertain, but we can start to sit down and align across all of our different departments. What is the way that we want to work with our publishers so that we can interact with our consumers and best drive performance?
Cool. So gauging the level of depression in the room right now. How's it going?
Okay, do we have any questions?
Hi, Christina Smith, Keen Footwear. Not that we need an excuse to drink at this conference, but I think you guys just provided the best reasoning I've heard so far in the past
We're going to be
48
fine.
hours.
We're going to be fine.
So thanks so much for that.
The tears on your face on the ski slopes,
I mean,
it's glistened.
Jesus, this is just like, I want to go stick my head in the sand now, to be perfectly honest.
I'm never gonna be
and just
invited back.
wait it out until retirement. But the one thing, I almost hate to ask this question because I'm probably going to get shot by people in the room, but it's, to me, it feels like the thing that needs to be put out there with this topic. The one thing that wasn't mentioned is the role that government should play in this conversation. And I mean, GDPR is an effing mess. I don't expect California's regulations to be that much better. Maybe better perceptually for the consumer, but certainly as advertisers as well, it's a hot, sticky mess in terms of, unpeeling that onion. But should we look to the government as a forcing function to at least get everyone in the same room, all of these platforms? Because I think, Amanda, you hinted at, Apple's super altruistic, reasoning for doing what they're doing. So I don't think we can expect the Apple and the Google and the Facebook and the Pinterest and the Amazon to get into a room and figure this out unless they're forced to. Does that seem reasonable, or is that just even the worst idea known to mankind outside of the overall topic of what we're talking about? Just love to hear your thoughts on it.
Do you want to go?
I think government regulation, it's just going to be cat and mouse all the time. So the only thing good that's coming out of it is that it's forcing us to break the cookie and build something better. Personally, I don't see that there's any other way than pure innovation for us to move forward. As a marketer, I don't want to be regulated.
Yeah, I think I can probably say more than everybody on the panel. So, not being a brand, but I think ultimately we put ourselves in a government regulation position, and I think as you saw it when CCPA came out, and it was done under the dark. It was under the dark of night, swooshed in with no commenting. It was done intentionally that way.
With the black cape.
The fact that it happened in California, where all of the Googles and Facebooks and everyone sits, is even better. But I think we're there because even as an industry, we could not come together to try to lobby for a better law. The IAB put together, their lobbying effort. Google separated and did their own lobbying effort. Facebook separated and did their own lobbying effort. I think it proves that we're incapable as an industry, quite frankly, to do this ourselves. And so that's unfortunately the ramification, is that it's going to welcome government regulation. I will say that I think GDPR is, in my mind, a far harder law to be compliant with, because it is so specific, but at the same time so vague. I think CCPA is a little easier, not easy, but easier. I ultimately think we will need a regulation of the land, but at this point, most brands are going to treat CCPA as the law of the land, unless another state passes an even stricter version of it. But the definition from state to state of PII and is so different that I'm not sure we're going to see a federal regulation anytime quickly. They're a little busy right now internally fighting with each other. So I think we're at a place where, unfortunately, whether we want to be regulated or not, we're going to be, because we didn't come together holistically ourselves before we got to this point. I do think that the way that the impact of these regulations are another place that we're putting our head in the sand. And I've even had conversations at this conference where folks don't think it's going to have a lot of impact. And I think it's going to have a lot of impact. I think consumers are going to have to learn the lesson of what they lose. And then CCPA 2.0 is going to come in next November. And it's going to write out our ability to change the user experience if they do or don't share their data with us. So I think the reality is that we need to stop thinking it's not going to affect us, and it is. And so that's, I think, what we can control, is that we can't really, we're past the point of government regulation, but we are in the perfect place to actually act on what the consumers are asking us to do.
Yeah, and working at JP Morgan, it's not my first time. We've been regulated before. It goes well. It's fine. It's fine.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, now I think John's going to talk to us. We do have our roundtables, and we are going to still hear from Debbie Downer here. So if you want to continue getting depressed, and we'll have shots afterwards, that's going to be with dealing with the ITP. We also have a roundtable for retailers as publishers, and that's with Maggie Miller. We heard from her earlier today. And Immonification, which is with Kerry Curran. And
we'll assign those in just a second. Let me just go through this quickly for you guys. First of all, where's Adam from Merkle? Are you in the room? Adam? Okay. If we can get you going a little early, would you be game for that? Because I think there's some skiers in the room. So we including you. Yeah, okay. So we're going to try and get the Lunch and Learn going a little early so we can get you guys out there. Just quickly here, skiing today here at Deer Valley.